legal owners, who are responsible for moving 8% of the world's cargo. There are no minor cogs in the system. Each terminal must be accounted for, lest the entire system break. Every hiccup in such a system means thousands lose. That soldering iron is the bank of the world building.
Silence. The water, the light. There is no recognition. Only the immensity of the sea and the...
We are where we are. I have no truer answer to give, unfortunately.
This is what...
Was there some...
This has been... Might I suggest...
Absolutely. My commitment...
It's better...
Indeed. I'm always at your service. Glad to have been of assistance.
Is what you want. Look at that lady. A well-kept, positive, wild duck. These are the... Now look, you're poor. Poor as balls. You can't ask this person for money. Maybe you...
As I was saying, if there's any way I may be of assistance, please don't hesitate to ask. Of course, Detective.
As you approach the metal grill, you can hear several voices having what appears to be an animated, "This must be it." Beyond this door lies the beating heart of radical communism in Martinez. Somehow, the night air softens the smell of trash and sea brine. As the breeze pulls through the canvas like a shuttle through a loom, you catch a hint of something unexpected, something earthy, warm, and burnt. The acrid smell of failure. No, that's just slightly burnt coffee, a smell you would recognize anywhere.
Just look at these pigs sniffing about after hours. Go ahead and arrest me, officer. I swear I'll go peacefully.
The metal grill is cool to the touch. You notice the lieutenant is looking uncustomarily anxious. His posture is rigid. His right hand hovers near the zipper of his jacket. He wants so badly to draw his armistice, but he also doesn't want to draw it.
Oh, I'm fine. I was practically born to infiltrate underground communist cells. Which is just to say, we should be prepared for any eventuality.
You can make out at least two separate voices. Two voices, both male, approximately early 20s.
Careful with those now. I have it. It's going to work. I can feel it.
You can hear animated voices. You can make two voices.
Careful with... I have it. It's...
The clang of metal reverberates all along the scaffolding. The voices coming from the other side fall silent.
Who's there? Is that you, Maurice? Who said communist? Did we say communist? Get out of here.
For a moment, silence.
What's the passphrase? Did he say something about sausages? He said something about moles. Perhaps he's just a night-wandering lunatic. Not even close. Perhaps he's drunk. No, he's not. We don't do ironic passphrases here. Are you locked out of your radio or computer or something? No. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4. Not a chance. We can't afford to compromise on our operation. Not at this point. Come back when you know the passphrase.
Look at that! The pig's trying to break in without the passphrase. Tisk tisk.
Let's go, detective. We'll get nowhere standing around in the snow.
The metal grill is cool to the touch. The long stretches of canvas below like sails in the night breeze. You hear the voices conferring once again.
He came back? Do you have the passphrase this time? Not a chance. We can't afford to compromise on our operation. Not at this point. Come back when you know the passphrase.
Look at that! The pig's trying to break in without the passphrase. Tisk tisk.
Let's go, detective.
The metal grill is cool to the touch. You hear
He came back? Do you have the passphrase this time?
there's no response. You begin to wonder whether they've slipped out some back way. No, they're still there. You can feel them back there.
Alright. The key's taped to the back of the door frame. Just make sure you put it back when you're done, or we'll all be locked out. And do watch the concrete. It just kind of falls away.
Charmant. After you, detective.
Have fun at your underground meeting, pig. Hope it's a blast.
The two young men are either oblivious to or ignoring your entrance. Their attentions are fixed on whatever it is they're stacking in the middle of the floor. Matchboxes, it appears.
I think it's holding, Alexis.
It is. It's holding.
It's definitely not holding. Those matchboxes are stacked so haphazardly, it's like they want them to collapse.
Careful, careful. Damn, hardly any difference. You two, you are late.
They should know the meeting starts at 10 p.m. sharp.
One leader and one follower. The most ancient power dynamic. There's a great deal of tension in this young man's shoulders, more than someone his age should bear. Meanwhile, his companion inclines toward him, eager to catch every word that dribbles from his friend's mouth. Don't let them see you flustered, sire. Play along. He's taken your measure, like an ideological boxer stepping into the ring.
We all have to take precautions, especially during these delicate times. What matters is that you've made it, and that you've done the reading.
Uh-oh. No one said anything about reading. You'll just have to wing this one.
Well, this is getting awkward. I'm not sure what you're expecting to find here then.
There's profound consternation in his voice. You suspect it's about something bigger than your not having done the reading.
Maybe they can explain themselves.
Sure, we're here most every night. Maybe we'll catch you again.
Sleep well, gendarme.
The gendarme returns. What do you need? Yeah, it's hers. She just sort of moved it all in a few months ago.
She said if she's going to make truly radical art, she needs a suitably radical workspace.
And I don't think she could afford rent at an actual studio. Oh, sure. He's definitely interesting, I would say.
Interesting? Isn't that just binoclard for, I don't have a real opinion? His companion's eyes widen with interest. He has a cold smile.
Come on. It's not that I don't have anything to say about Cindy's art. It's more that I'm still working out the details. It's a complex question. You've got to take your time with it.
You flustered the poor boy. Now he's got to say something.
I guess you could call her latest stuff a sort of counter-bourgeoisie calligraphy. She's got a real taste for radical slogans.
It's too bad she hasn't developed the theoretical foundation to do truly radical work.
I think she'll get there, though. She's still looking for a subject equal to her ambitions. The deal, at a fundamental level, I guess you could call it the shattered bones of a dream crushed by capital.
A feeble and hopelessly mixed metaphor.
That's really good, Steban. You should save that for an essay.
Thanks, Uli. When the idea is sound, the words just sort of flow.
Yes, now keep developing the idea.
That could be. It would explain some of the more ornate detailing. But we're speaking in world historical terms here. What his place represents, not what it merely was.
His friend yawns, evidently bored by literal reality.
The deal?
A feeble...
That's good.
Thanks, Uli.
Yes, now...
Leave it to the gendarme to enforce bourgeois stylistic values.
Besides, it's just a first draft. Go ahead.
The young man frowns at the little pile of boxes on the floor.
Nothing, just messing around until the meeting started.
They're watching those matchboxes awfully intently for two guys who are just messing around. It's almost as though they were trying to create the most unstable structure they could, with predictable results.
In the most generous sense, I would say we're cultivating revolutionary consciousness.
Yes, that's probably the best way to describe it.
But more specifically, we are running a reading group. The most rigorous and theoretically advanced materialist reading group in Martinaise.
Comrade Steban is a great discussion leader, one of the best at the university.
It's obvious they take this group of theirs extremely seriously. Whatever you do, don't compare it to a common book club.
That's our whole thing. The world is so shallow, all noise and repetition. We're interested in genuinely radical critique.
Precisely. We are not interested in senseless parroting. We like to read critically.
Within the contours of Mazovian historical materialism, of course.
As though you can call that problem teaching.
One thing you learn quickly at university is that you're not going to find a real education in any lecture hall or discussion seminar.
We are post-attendance, basically.
Exactly. The only worthwhile part of the so-called École Normale de Revachol is the library. That's where we've made our greatest critical strides.
They are not primary school delinquents, they are university students. Attendance isn't compulsory. Besides, we are not the skip squad.
We study all the foundational texts of Mazovian theory, of course. Just last week we finished the second volume of Puncher and Watman's Innocence of Capital.
Truly extraordinary.
And before that we spent 6 weeks on State and Plasm.
For some reason, the word plasm catches in your ear like a piece of old wax. Uh-oh. You can feel your attention span rapidly deteriorating.
We've also read Wertmüller's The Megastructure of History, and before that, Real and Reality.
Communist theorists love puns, in case that wasn't obvious.
Hablas une paix infernale.
The original Fizdale translation, not that watered-down revisionist garbage.
These two deserve the Order of Honor for bullshitting. There's no way they've actually read all this stuff.
Obviously.
But, of course, our special emphasis is on the theories of Ignace Nilsson and his followers, especially the inframaterialists. You're not familiar with him? It's pretty advanced stuff. You may not be ready for it yet, gendarme. Only Krasmazov's most trusted lieutenant, the evangelist of the revolution, and the founding father of the People's Republic of Samara.
It's hard to overstate how unimpressed he is that you've never heard of this world historical individual.
He also happens to be the greatest communist theorist after Mazov himself. It was Nilsson who first postulated the existence of ideological plasm, which forms the basis of inframaterialist theory.
Those words again. You've got to find out what this inframaterialist stuff is all about. Whatever it is, one thing's perfectly clear. These young students have a much deeper understanding of communism, and you could learn a thing or two from them. If you can convince them you're one of them. The young man sighs. His companion looks about furtively.
The gendarme returns. What do you need? What do you mean? This is the reading group. We're in something of a rebuilding phase.
Some of our former comrades didn't have the ideological fortitude our work demands.
Intellectual attrition is maybe the best way to describe it. Felix said he couldn't keep up with the reading on top of his classwork. And Susanna wanted to read text other than Mazovian theory. Like novels, if you can believe it.
Imagine the audacity of wanting to read a novel in a reading group.
Oh, sure. But you can always join a book club if that's what you're into. We've tried recruiting new members, but unfortunately the current intellectual climate is pretty hostile to inframaterialist thought. These days, if you're on the left, the ascendant schools are the Gottwaldians and their iconoclasts.
Don't forget about Maurice and the turnips.
Right. Then there was the whole turnip debacle. They're the most depressing school of communism. They love writing long books with a patina of Mazovian theory to cover up their cheap psychologizing.
A gang of cheap psychologists and intellectual midgets. Typical Gottwalders, in other words.
It's okay for Uli to say that because his dad is from Gottwald. The Gottwald school believe that intellectuals as a class are capable of sparking revolutionary change. So all they can do is critique capitalism from inside itself.
In other words, they have lost faith in their own relevance.
That's why they spend all their time smoking cigarettes and writing long works of criticism that make you want to commit suicide. If it were, they wouldn't keep committing suicide. You see, the Gottwald school look like communists. They talk like communists. But scratch the patina and you'll see beneath that they're just depressed liberals who've read too many books. For starters, they love talking about beans. That's right. Iconoclasts are obsessed with beans. They love thinking about beans. They love counting beans. But most of all, they love building models to predict how many beans there'll be in the future. They're by far the most bean-centric school of communism.
Ah yes, the much maligned bean counters, ensconced in their think tanks and high-rises, believing they can save the world through a series of incremental, assiduously technocratic reforms.
See? You're already falling for that scarcity logic. You start off assuming there aren't enough beans to go around. So naturally you want to cut the bean rations in half. And next thing you know, there are budget cuts, So now we've got to cut the bean rations in half again. You see, iconoclasts claim to be communists, but in reality they're just liberals with hard-ons for spreadsheets. For starters, they love talking about bean. Oh sure. But iconoclasts, they're by far...
Ah yes, the much maligned bean.
If only. They've got all the beans accounted for in their asset sheets. Their quarterly...
And next thing you see, iconoclasts claim to be communists, but in reality they're just liberals with hard-ons. Of course not. The only people who actually call themselves liberals are mouth-foaming reactionaries.
Basically indistinguishable from fascists. You'd need an X-ray machine to tell the difference.
Cindy is... how to describe her role?
Something of an ideological auxiliary, perhaps.
Yes, that's exactly how I would put it. And naturally, we support her radical counter-liberal aesthetics.
But she refuses to submit an essay, so we can't call her a member of the group per se.
That doesn't stop her from using the room for studio space, of course. It's an unfortunate story. You see, our ex-comrade Maurice is something of an economist.
He's studying macro and microeconomics.
Wow, a real intellectual, it sounds like.
Right. So a few weeks ago we were discussing the extra physical capabilities of the revolutionary state. And Maurice said... what were his exact words?
It was unbelievable. He said, turnips don't care if they are grown by communists, moralists, or Vulcan. They grow just the same.
Basically, he was rejecting the whole foundation of inframaterialist theory.
What is this inframaterialist business they keep blathering about? You've never heard of anything like it.
Susanna said that he has been hanging out with some non-communists lately.
For us, the question boiled down to, if you don't even accept the basic ideas of Nielsen and inframaterialist theory, why are you in the reading group? Of course you do. It's pretty basic stuff. Well, it wasn't so much that he was expelled.
He just quit coming. We haven't seen him around for weeks.
Go ahead. Clinching? No. We're not an operational cell.
We think of ourselves as more of an intellectual vanguard.
No, we're an independent organization. We acknowledge and respect the union's efforts, but our interests are more theoretical than Mr. Clare's.
He speaks the truth.
Our stance? What? Does he want to know if the SRV has established a party line on the lynchings in Martinez?
Though historically speaking, the SRV has supported direct action against right-wing paramilitary squads, especially when they are doing the Indo-Tribe's dirty work.
Good point. So as a provisional matter, I can say we support it.
Are they being sarcastic? You feel like you're caught in some elaborate joke labyrinth, but it's always that way. Beneath the crust of irony, there's a molten sincerity that threatens to erupt forth. You may witness it yet.
That's easy. Crime is simply the inevitable expression of the injustice and incoherence embedded within capitalism itself. It's a symptom, in other words, not a cause.
His companion can barely suppress a yawn.
No, unfortunately, the communards were hunted down and killed nearly to a man. All that's left of them are bones and old rifles. Not exactly the second incarnation of Krasmazov, is he? What's it for? Ah, I see. That's certainly kind of you. Clinching?
We think of ourselves as...
No, unfortunately, the communards were hunted down and killed nearly to a man.
His companion's eyes widen as you hold up the ancient weapon. He's practically itching to stick that thing in someone's face and pull the trigger.
Yes, like that one. I wonder how many of these are still lying around in cellars or sealed up behind the masonry. Can I hold it? heavier than I was expecting.
The attitude of a priest bearing one of the holy relics of his faith. Though it is long out of service, its power is evident to him. When he's finished, he returns the rifle to you with a nod of appreciation.
Lynching? No.
We think of ourselves as more.
No, unfortunately. The communards were hunted down and killed nearly to a man. The Insulindian deluge wiped out an entire generation of communists. Afterward, they were all bulldozed into mass graves.
His friend, though, seems oddly unmoved. Mark it. There's something sinister in that one. A moment of silence. They're waiting for you to speak.
Lynching?
We think of ourselves.
No, unfortunately. It's a world historical nightmare. One from which we've yet to awaken.
When will you wake up? And what will you see when you do? A moment of silence. They're waiting for you to speak.
We typically only accept new members once per semester. There's this whole process with essays and presentations on assigned topics. But given that we have some extra seating at the moment, I guess we could be convinced to expedite an application or two.
Steban, you can't be serious. For these gendarmes?
I am serious. As materialists, we've got to adapt to conditions as they are. Besides, assuming he's even still interested, that is.
What's there to be scared of? You've really been cracking the books these last few days. You can go toe to intellectual toe with any reading group in Martinez. Now, chin up. You've got this.
Oh, you want to start now? Sure, we can manage that.
You've caught him off balance. The momentum is already in your favor.
Go ahead and take a seat. Since we haven't had time to prepare an exhaustive questionnaire, I think we can keep this interview more freeform. Why don't you tell us a bit about the books you're interested in, and we'll just see where the conversation goes. Aha, a real old-school pedestrian materialist. All right, we'll play along. So what sort of practical works are we talking about? Cockatoos. Fascinating. So tell us what you gathered from your ornithological researches.
This is a good start. They're starting to loosen up. You feel relaxed and in control. This is a subject where you hold all the advantages.
I have to say, I underestimated the opulence of cockatoos. I've only ever seen the grey ones. It makes sense though. Mazovianism stresses the essential continuity between humanity and nature. So anything you find in one should be reflected in the other. What's the exact quote, Uli?
I believe it's man is the mirror of the world.
These kids are eating out of your hand, practically. Another quarter of an hour disappears. The questions come rapid fire, but you have an answer for every one. Now you can sense things starting to slow down. The interview must be reaching an inflection point.
Don't you think, though, that you can only really understand current events if you have a firm background in history and political theory? Don't think I'm familiar with it. Give us a quick summary, if you don't mind.
Now's your chance to end this interview on a high note. You quickly gloss Lopez de Fuego's essential argument, peppering it with your own commentary and asides. Like a river emptying into the sea, the discussion winds its way toward the character of the Innocence herself.
But then, any critical account of Dolores Day's reign has to seriously reckon with her atrocities in Margartania and La Vuelta during the Mesque secession, don't you think? Total nonsense. The greatest thing Dolores Day ever did was get blasted by her own terrier.
If he wants a real critical history, he's got to read on the material conditions of the Mirovan Boilermakers.
He's so good. Brutally revelatory. In any case, I think we've heard enough. We could use someone with your perspective in the group, with just a bit more theoretical foundation. I think you'll be making real contributions.
Yes, I would say he's got serious potential at least.
And with that, welcome to the most ideologically advanced materialist reading group in Martinez. Here's your first assignment. It's an overview of inframaterialist theory. A little basic, as you'll see, but one has to start somewhere. You're going to fit right in, I think. Come back when you're done. We'll be here pretty much every night after 10 p.m. Do be sure to take your time with the reading. We'll be eager to hear your thoughts.
The cover of this pocket-sized volume features a swirl of orange, yellow, and green. The title, A Brief Look at Inframaterialism, is set in an authoritative yet approachable serif font. What an interesting color palette. It's vibrant, yet somehow leaves you ever so slightly nauseated. On the inside jacket flap, you find a brief summary. What is inframaterialism? A highly theoretical branch of Masovian communism, a collection of mystical ramblings by a discredited revolutionary, or possibly both? This brief look, TM, introduces readers to one of this century's most fascinating and misunderstood theories in a concise, jargon-free manner. The back of the book contains 4 or 5 pages of primary and secondary sources, but you need access to a university library to find most of them. In other words, this guide is the only source you're likely to find. You turn to the table of contents. The guide itself is divided into several sections with seemingly esoteric titles like Effects of Plasm on Root Vegetables and Mental Projection and Transference. There's also a brief introduction about the life of Ignas Nielsen. Known to his numerous admirers as the evangelist of the revolution, and to his even more numerous enemies as the apocalyptic Shrike, Ignas Nielsen remains one of the most controversial and fascinating figures to emerge in the years of the anti-centennial revolution, second only to Karamazov himself. During his unparalleled life, he helped guide a revolution in one country and found a new state in another. Along the way, he committed some of the most notorious war crimes in an era famed for its atrocities. And yet, his most fascinating contribution to history may be the most overlooked. His theory of ideological plasm, from which his followers and successors developed the school of communism known as inframaterialism. If you're like most people, you probably believe that your thoughts reside in your brain, right? That's not right at all. Thoughts don't exist in the brain. They float through the air. You're wrong, at least according to Ignas Nielsen. As Mazov's devoted comrade and leading theoretician, Nielsen was responsible for developing much of the intellectual foundation of communism. But his interests and speculations were famously wide-ranging. During his final years in exile, he produced, among other things, an early guide to home brewing, instructions for raising revolutionary children, plans for a universal pictographic language, and a detailed materialist critique of Dolores Day's chess strategy. A true man of ideas, equal to any of the great DeLorean polymaths. But one subject he returned to time and time again was the fundamental relationship between thoughts and matter. We may yet discover, he wrote in his notebooks, that under certain exceptional circumstances, the proletariat's embrace of historical materialism may be so fervent that their beliefs take form in the world of matter as a kind of revolutionary plasm. Stay with us a moment longer. What's more, Nielsen speculated that this plasm, when it becomes powerful enough, might begin to influence the material reality surrounding it. Hence the name, inframaterialism. Unfortunately, Nielsen passed away before he was able to develop these initial ideas into a full-fledged theory. That work was left to subsequent generations of communist theorists. Building on Nielsen's basic insight, these theorists reached a startling conclusion that a sufficiently revolutionary state might begin to exhibit certain extra-physical effects based on the amount of plasm generated by its citizens. Please, just stick with it. Otherwise, may we recommend a brief look at words and concepts? That's because this is absolute idiocy, not even worth No. There's something here. You can feel it. Inframaterialists divide the extra-physical effects of the revolutionary state by the level of plasm required to achieve them. At the lowest, or first level, revolutionary plasm is believed to stimulate or invigorate matter without altering its essential properties. Precisely, though plasm does more than increase vegetable yields, it may also influence the physiology of revolutionaries themselves. It's also been postulated that plasm may account for the remarkably full and manly facial hair observed on some communist males. Your hand feels clammy against your bare chin. You wipe it along the back of the book and keep reading. Of course, inframaterialists argue that revolutionary plasm may stimulate human physiology in other ways as well. Oh yeah, we're talking about white-hot communist sex, baby. That's correct. Reports from the revolutionary period claim that the most radical 8 hours? There's no way. Your equipment. No wonder the communards couldn't shoot straight. They were too shagged out. Hyper-productive vegetables and ultra-horny communards are fine. But this theory hasn't quite gotten strange enough for you. And on that note, you feel like you've gotten the general idea of inframaterialism, enough to carry on a basic conversation at least. But if you'd like to go even deeper into some of the more speculative aspects of the theory, you could always read further. Of course you want to go deeper. What else are you here for? The book fits quite snugly into your palm. It would also fit comfortably into a jacket pocket. You flip forward a few pages until you come upon a chapter titled Mental Projection and Transference. When a community has achieved a sufficiently high degree of revolutionary fervor, inframaterialists believe that second-level effects. At this second level, certain hyper-revolutionary individuals may even develop the ability to extend their thoughts into material space and vice versa. According to inframaterialist theory, yes. Under suitably revolutionary conditions, that is. Of course, one doesn't need to be a communist to be attuned to the thoughts of your brothers and sisters. It's become something of a folk legend that during their final meeting, Nielsen and Mazov didn't speak a single word, preferring to sit in silence with their chamomile tea, reading. One of the minor tragedies of the late revolutionary period is that few reliable accounts survive. Much of what we know of the communards' activities during this period come from memoirs and second-hand accounts. some only written down decades after the fact, and of dubious authenticity.
I suppose we do work quite well together.
Your words hang in the air as the lieutenant scribbles something in his notebook. At some point, he realizes you're waiting for him and looks up with a tightly knit brow. The lieutenant looks at you evenly for a moment, then returns to his notebook without a word.
Did I? My bad, detective. Won't happen again.
As we were saying, it's generally believed that these effects are only exhibited by certain hyper-revolutionary individuals, generally less than 0.01% of the revolutionary population.
I suppose we do.
Your words hang in the air.
That happened exactly once, and only under extreme duress.
As we were saying, it's generally believed because plasm has never been directly observed, the exact mechanism behind these effects remains entirely speculative. In other words, there's no evidence that any of this mind-reading stuff is real. Why are you getting hung up on mechanisms? Open your mind's aperture just a little wider. You're so close to true understanding. Most inframaterialists would argue that the inability of skeptics to detect plasm is simply evidence of their own insufficient revolutionary enthusiasm. There you have it, a perfectly unfalsifiable loop. The theory is impossible to disprove on its own grounds, meaning it's hardly a theory at all. This should be more than enough for a stimulating discussion. That said, if you're still yearning for more, you must. Everyone knows books save their best parts for the end. You breeze through the next several sections until you arrive at the final chapter, titled A Communism Above Reality. When a society's revolutionary fervor reaches the third and highest level, inframaterialist theoreticians have postulated that the laws of physics cease to be laws. More like suggestions, according to some of the SRV's leading inframaterialists. Of course, it's impossible to say what exactly happens under these conditions. No known society has ever achieved the levels of revolutionary enthusiasm the theory seems to require. Some inframaterialists have even argued that it might require more plasm than humanity alone may be capable of producing. In the SRV, there have been attempts to organize certain species of aquatic mammals as well as a few of the higher corvids. But as of this writing, only human beings have demonstrated the intellectual capacity for revolutionary communism. There are numerous stories from Samara involving bandits. The form of these stories also recalls several well-known Samoan folk tales, in particular the one commonly known as Clever Oleg and the Flying Magistrate. Among known attempts to channel third-level capabilities, the most it concerns an interesting series of events that took place during the invasion of Revachol. As coalition forces made landfall, a cadre of Nielsen's most fervent acolytes attempted to compress a coalition aerostatic with their collective will. According to communard law, these acolytes positioned themselves at the top of a redoubt just over the bay of Revachol. From that vantage, they proceeded to visualize pinching coalition warship debutante between their fingers, a gesture believed to assist in the extra-physical materialization of their thoughts. The acolytes, along with the redoubt, were vaporized in an artillery strike before the process could be completed. It's been said, though, that in the weeks following the battle, the captain of the debutante noted an increase in incidents of crewmen striking their heads on unexpectedly low bulkheads. Of course, colorful anecdotes only scratch the surface of what inframaterialists believe may be possible in a truly third-level society. Some have theorized that such a society would be fundamentally unrecognizable, lacking many of the institutions we typically take for granted in advanced societies, including organized governments, financial institutions, and law enforcement. Did that book just say there's no place for you in this future? This sounds like a seditious fantasy. How can they allow books like this in print? Others have argued that people living under third-level conditions will be immune to such infirmities as hunger, disease, and mental illness. In some of his later writings, Nielsen himself speculated about the potential for an extra-physical architecture that disregards the laws of bourgeois physics and instead relies on the revolutionary faith of the people for structural integrity. Nielsen called it the highest expression of communist principles, a society whose literal foundation is the faith of its people. On the following page, you come across a few black and white reproductions from Nielsen's own notebooks. One sketch depicts a government ministry shaped like a great inverted pyramid, a hectare in width at the top, balanced atop foundations the size of common apartments. Another depicts a leaning tower wrapped in a dramatic helix. The caption beneath it reads, "The Tower of History." Something about that tower looks awfully familiar. Could it be that's what the students were trying to recreate with the matchboxes? In the corner of one of the reproduced notebook pages, you can make out the following words, written in Nielsen's distinctive slashing script. A state that has lost the faith of its people has forfeited the right to exist. That's all right, because you've reached the end of the book. If you'd like to try something different, may we recommend a brief look at Gradian literature?
You're back. Yes, let's get right to it.
His companion leans forward, ready to jump in. They're impressed that you dove right into the most advanced parts of the theory. Half an hour evaporates and the conversation is still wending its way toward new and unexpected places. A cool breeze coming off the bay wraps itself around the Capeside apartments in a nearly forgotten part of that glorified construction site, surrounded by rusted pieces of scaffolding and walls of faded tarpaulin. A detective of the RCM debates the intricacies of an abstruse theory with a pair of university students.
But if it's true that this individual possesses so much capital that light literally bends around him, then that must mean...
In Innocence of Capital, Puncher and Wortman argue that communists must possess as little capital as possible in order to keep their thinking undiluted by its influence.
Again, he was just a regular high-net-worth individual. There was nothing extra-physical about him.
Now the breeze has subsided. All is still except for the last bits of steam rising from the coffee pot.
Well, on that note, I think we can call it an evening.
No, wait. Can this really be the end?
Yes. One of our better discussions lately, on the whole.
What do you mean, is that it? You've done the reading, we talked about it. What more do you expect from a reading group? More what? It seems like there's something on your mind. Maybe a question you mean to ask?
He probably won't get a better chance.
But it's getting late, so maybe pick the most important question.
Detective, how should I know what questions you have about communism?
The question you mean to ask is both very complicated and incredibly simple. The young man waits patiently for you to finish.
Yes?
The young man considers your words for a minute. You're witnessing his ironic armor melt before you. This is his true self you're seeing now. There's something going on in there, but his innermost sanctum is still beyond your reach.
The theorist Buncher and Watman, not inframaterialists, but theorists nonetheless, say that communism is a secular version of Pericanasian theology, that it replaces faith in the divine with faith in humanity's future. I have to say, I've never entirely understood what they mean, but I think maybe the answer is in there, somewhere. Only in this very specific sense. Communism doesn't dangle any promises of eternal bliss or reward. The only promise it offers is that the future can be better than the past, if we're willing to work and fight and die for it. Nobody said fulfilling the proletariat's historic role would be easy. It demands great faith with no promise of tangible reward. But that doesn't mean we can simply give up. Especially then.
And of course, we'll be shooting right back.
Their faces blurred, yet frozen as though in ambrotype. You were never that young, were you?
I guess you could say we believe it because it's impossible. It's our way of saying we refuse to accept that the world has to remain. Like this. Yes, that's a good way to think of it. Broken, but not irreparable. A thought can be a very powerful thing. That's the whole idea of inframaterialism.
His words aren't really directed at you. He's wrestling with himself now.
Steban, it's getting pretty late.
You're right. We should clean this up and get going.
Of course, the matchboxes. You'd very nearly forgotten to ask about them. Now may be your last chance.
So you really did read all the way to the end. Yeah, Uli and I were trying to see whether there was enough plasm between the two of us to hold up a few matchboxes.
Saying it out loud makes him realize how foolish it sounds.
It was just a little informal experiment. No reason to take it too seriously.
The young man looks at you a moment, then at his companion.
What could it hurt? All right, let's give it another go.
You know what? I'll sit this one out. I don't think you want my skeptical materialism interfering.
Before long, a modest tower begins to rise from the pile of matchboxes. You place every box with the utmost delicacy and precision.
Easy, Uli.
It's holding. It's holding.
For the moment. The higher the tower goes, the quieter the room seems to become. Aside from the occasional comment, the three of you are completely absorbed by the task.
All right, you go next, Steban.
The young man pushes back his shirt sleeves, revealing the pale flesh of his forearms.
Is it? It's holding. It's holding. Ah, shit.
It's all right, Steban. That was still very close. One of our best performances yet.
The lieutenant says nothing, but his expression suggests otherwise.
It's fine, Uli. That's enough parlor games for one night. We should clean up.
Well, I think we're probably finished here, Detective.
Wait a minute, if you don't mind. We wanted to get your opinion on something. A few little changes we've been thinking about. Nothing too major, I think. We were talking potentially about relaxing some parts of our admissions process.
I thought the cloak and dagger routine made us seem more appealing.
I thought so too, but perhaps we overdid it, just a little. There was another thing. We were also debating putting up some posters around town.
Though some of us maintain that advertising is an unacceptably bourgeois tactic.
That's what makes it so beautiful. The irony is unbeatable. As a noted art cop, you definitely have an opinion on this.
Glad to hear it. I was thinking we might be able to get Cindy to design the posters.
I guess no one could accuse Cindy of having a bourgeois aesthetic.
Plus, I've got the perfect place in mind. Put some more coffee on, Uli. We've got a long night ahead of us. We should probably get Cindy in here too. Oh, and Gendarme. One last thing. About that question you asked earlier. It reminded me of a certain poem that you might appreciate.
Ah, so he has read something besides his books of abstruse theory.
It was written by a young communard who was killed on the barricades during the coalition landings. The story goes that he wrote it on the last night of his life, keeping watch from the barricades in the middle of the night. I don't have the whole thing committed to memory, but there's a line in it I think about sometimes. In dark times, should the stars also go out? Anyway, good night to you.
The old king and his horse have been covered in posters with radical slogans like "No kings, no bosses," and "Again and once more after that." At the bottom of the posters, in smaller lettering, are details about meeting at a local coffee house.
Looks like the students took your advice to heart, Detective.